Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The Commerce Department today announced changes to the census. Ordinarily, that would not be a very big deal. Starting in 2 years, respondents will be asked if they're U.S. citizens. That question has been asked on census forms in years past, and there are obvious reasons for asking it. The main point of the census, this is why the Constitution requires it, is to apportion congressional districts so Americans can vote for their representatives. Only U.S. citizens are allowed to vote in federal elections, so it might be nice to know how many live in this country. Sound reasonable to you? Even boring? Are you still awake? If not, then you're not a professional outrage merchant. The left came close to losing consciousness today over this idea. The Attorney General of California, Javier Becerra, says he will sue the Trump administration over this change. Becerra claims that asking people whether or not they're citizens is somehow unconstitutional. Watch.
Given the way that this administration has attacked immigrants, you can understand why immigrant families would be afraid to fill out the census questionnaire. In our lawsuit, we argue that this decision by the Trump administration violates the Constitution and federal law.
Well, Ari Berman of Mother Jones Magazine is even madder than Javier Becerra. Berman apparently misplaced his Xanax this morning. He got so worked up about the census question, he described the change as, quote, a huge crisis for democracy. Oh, come on. Nobody actually believes that. Nobody believes lines like that, even the red-faced people who scream them. The left doesn't care about what is or what is not constitutional. Did you watch the gun march this weekend? Obviously, they don't care. A crisis for democracy? If you really cared about democracy, representative democracy, you'd be vigilant about preventing voter fraud. Instead, the left actively abets it in state after state, including California, where illegals get driver's licenses and can register to vote. Democracy, please. What progressives really care about is power. They hate the fact that you took some of their power by voting for Donald Trump, and they want it back by any means necessary. That's what this is about, obviously. Cesar Vargas is an attorney and an illegal immigrant, and he joins us tonight. Cesar, thanks for coming on. Tell me
Thank you for
why
having me.
Counting your citizens, asking whether they are citizens, how could that be unconstitutional when the Constitution requires that you count your citizens?
Well, we're talking about the Constitution, right? And Republicans and conservatives are all about the original intent, the founding meaning of the Constitution. Well, the Constitution explicitly states that we need an actual enumeration. In other words, an actual count of the whole persons in each state. Never said anything about immigration status, never said anything. The purpose is to count everyone in the United States, regardless of the immigration status. So that's perfect. As a person who approves of original intent, you would understand that we will need to count everything and abide by the Constitution. So I'm just talking about the Constitution at this moment.
No, I know you're lecturing me the Constitution. But does this change say that you're not allowed to count people who are non-citizens? No. It says take account of them. It's one of the many questions. The Constitution, by the way, since I know you're so familiar with it, doesn't say anything about counting people by race. The census does that. Are you opposed to that? Should we not ask what people's race is?
Well, under this administration, we have been very clear that it's about targeting immigrants. When the president says we're going to target Mexicans and rapists,
I'm going to let you read your bumper stickers. Wait, stop. I want you to answer my question because I think it's a fair question. You don't think that the census form ought to be allowed to ask people whether they're here legally or whether they're citizens or not. Okay. But you do think it ought to be allowed to ask them what their genetic makeup is, what their race is? Why?
Well, I think we should definitely have a very simple document that says, hey, how many people live in your home? How many people have an opportunity to live in the state? I think that's simple. I'm not putting aside the politics about race, about immigration status. I'm agreeing with you that we should count people.
What about their race? The census asks what your race is. I think it's creepy as hell, to be honest, since your race has nothing to do with any choice that you made, something you're born with. But the census asks it, and it asks it because the left demands that it ask it. Do you think the census ought to be allowed to ask people's race?
Well, I think we should have a simple count. That's
yes
it.
Or no?
And maybe no. I think we shouldn't have immigration status. We shouldn't have about race. We should say, hey, how many people live in your house? That's it. That's what the Constitution requires. It's all about allocation and representation.
What about male or female? Should it ask that? Should it be allowed? Is that unconstitutional too?
Well, I think if a person wants to designate, hey, I'm a male, I'm a female, let them answer that question.
Hold on, but that wasn't the question. The census asks, are you a man or a woman? Are you non-Hispanic white? Are you African American? Are you American Indian? And now it's going to ask, are you a citizen? Only one of those questions bothers you. not because of the constitutionality of it, but because you think it might dilute the political power of illegal aliens.
No.
So let's stop pretending this is about the Constitution, because it's not.
I'm agreeing with you that it should be about counting people based on people, not about representation,
so
about whether you're citizens or not. It's not about voting power.
Of illegal
the
alien lawyers
census does
and say, you know
not say
what, let's take the
anything
race
about
questions
voting.
off.
The Constitution says, hey, we just need to count people. If you're a male or if you're a female, great. But
so
when
it's
you talk about representation, about citizenship, that's a whole different story.
Slow down. Why is it a difference? It's a different story because you think it might dilute the political power of illegal aliens, who, I could add, I'm not a lawyer like you, shouldn't be here in the first place. But you're not bothered by sex or race. So let's just stop pretending. Let's drop the facade. Let's stop playing the stupid game where we pretend it's about your concerns about the Constitution of a country that you're not even allowed to be in, because I think you're here illegally too. So let's just say this is about pure political power. It's about one side trying to take back power from the other. And, let's be adults about it. Can we do that, or do you want to keep this pretense going?
That shows that that's concern of your views. That's the concern of you, that you're afraid that if you count undocumented immigrants, that's going to dilute your power. It's not about power. It's about simple representation. The fundamental principle of this nation is about equal representation, regardless of your immigration status. We all have a voice. And you know the Constitution is not just about citizenship.
Okay. Citizenship is the basis upon which we determine political power. Citizens have political power, non-citizens don't. That's the difference. If you want to distill citizenship to a sentence, there you have it. And so, yes, I do want to dilute the political power of the citizens of other countries. I don't think that Russian citizens or Nigerian citizens or citizens from the Seychelles ought to be allowed to vote in my elections. That's constitutional. It's the definition of constitutional.
Well, that's not what America stands for. What America stands for is that you can be 100% American, but you can be 100% Mexican, African, French, and so forth.
So
you know what?
Citizens
in this
get to
country,
vote in
we're
federal.
allowed to have dual citizenship. You know that?
And by the way,
we're allowed to have American citizenship and Mexican citizenship and French citizenship. That's the crazy thing about how beautiful this country is about.
But you're not allowed to not have citizenship and vote, which leads to a question I've been meaning to ask you for some time, as we've been abetting your illegal stay here in this country. Do you plan to vote in the next election? I think you live in California. They'll let you vote. It's illegal. Do you plan to do it anyway, based on the theory you just elucidated for the rest of us?
Well, we're talking about counting. I do think that every person should be counted.
Are you going to vote?
Now,
it's a simple
your question about universal, I do believe that we should have universal voting for everyone to ensure that everyone has
for citizens of other countries.
Everyone has a republic.
This Putin should be able to vote here.
No taxation without representation. I believe that. That's a fundamental of this nation, isn't it?
Who comes to the United States and buys a deck of Marlboros and pays a sales tax is entitled to vote. That's what you're saying.
If that person comes here to contribute to the country, let him have a say in his government. Simple as that.
Let foreigners vote. I hope the Democratic Party runs on that. I think it'd be a fun election. Caesar, thank you for being honest.
Thank you so much.
It.
Thank you, Tucker. Take care.
Chris Kobach is the Secretary of State of the state of Kansas. He's been following these issues closely because he cares, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming on. So,
thanks for having me, Tucker.
Explain to us why it's important to know whether or not people counted by the census are American citizens.
There are a million reasons why. The first and foremost is that any sovereign nation needs to know how many citizens it has. The second is that all kinds of statistics require us, like unemployment statistics, knowing how many of the people in the United States are citizens and how many are non-citizens, meaning aliens, both legal and illegal. We have to know that. And then apportionment. If Congress decides, as it should, to stop counting illegal aliens, we need to know exactly how many are in each category. I mean, it's absurd that states like California have an inflated number of representatives in Congress because they have so many illegal aliens in it. So, there's so many reasons. But let me just quickly respond to your previous guest. I couldn't stop laughing. His notion that it's unconstitutional to count citizens. Ask people if they are citizens or not. Look, we started doing this in the 1820 census. The founding fathers were still alive in 1820. If it was unconstitutional to ask, are you a citizen, they would have said, hey, don't ask the citizenship question. That's unconstitutional. And the second thing is, the Supreme Court ruled in 1964 in Westbury versus Sanders that diluting the votes of U.S. citizens, which is what happens when you count the illegal aliens in a district, that is unconstitutional. So it's a ludicrous argument that
I wonder if conservatives make a mistake in having constitutional arguments with people who think the Constitution is fundamentally illegitimate because it was written by slave owners in the first place. I mean, this really has nothing to do with the Constitution. I doubt Javier Becerra knows what's in the Constitution. He doesn't care. This is all sophism. It's demagoguery designed to take power from people they don't think should have it, voters. Don't you think?
Well, I think so. And you hit the nail on the head when you said, look, it's all about power. That's why the left is apoplectic about the notion that we would be counting citizens again, like we've done through most of our country's history, because they see that this potentially could threaten the inflated number of congressional seats. But again, the Trump administration can't do it unilaterally. It would take an act of Congress next to say, okay, apportionment should not count illegal aliens. But we should have done that decades ago, by the way.
That's for sure. That and a lot of other things. Mr. Kobach, thank you for joining us. Great to see you.
My pleasure.